Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the third and final part of Chapter 1 of Juvenile Justice, or rather Juvenile Delinquency, our textbook. This is the third part of our lecture of Chapter 1. So thanks for sticking in. Again, apologies that it's broken up into several videos. Several students had requested in the previous class that maybe they broken up rather than having a giant 2 to 3 hour video. So we're trying this. If this doesn't work, let me know. We can always change it. Anyway, so where we last left off, if you remember, we talked about how status offenses are these juvenile only things, and there's a difference between delinquency and status offenses. Delinquencies are still crime, but status offenses are these, because you're a juvenile, they are a crime, like staying out past curfew, that kind of thing. And again, we wrote curfew up here. We are still going to come back to it, I promise. But I want to touch on the other things from the chapter before we talk about curfew. Anyway, I also put forward a what if question. I said, is there a better way to handle things? Should we have different systems in place to deal with the different types of crimes, whether they're status offenses or delinquencies? And is there a better way to, in general, deal with a juvenile who's committed some kind of crime? So, just to remind you, our goal as of right now in our system, and I guess this is my segue into coming back to a previous point, so I will go back up just to kind of point out that, we did talk about this concept of punishment versus rehabilitation, and we are still going to touch on that in curfew, but this is where we're coming back finally to that. And so the modern juvenile justice system, and it's been for a while, has been on the rehabilitative side. It is on the you can become better. You are not just a criminal doomed to repeat things. You can do better. You don't get punished for punishment's sake. You are put in a situation that's supposed to help you become a better citizen, be able to be released back to society and be a progressive member. And so, in particular, I really like that our textbook has this. So they have these little blurb pieces throughout. And so there's one on juvenile delinquency, and it's on the Southwest Key programs. But that's something to read into if you're interested. But I really like the critical thinking question they put. And I'm going to pose it to you. We're going to start with this, and then we're going to dive into our discussion. And the question is, how would you answer a critic who argues that all social problems should be cut and that social problems are a waste of time? And so, in particular, social problems are community kind of outreach programs and rehabilitative programs rather than juvenile hall holding children in a prison-like location and that kind of thing. So, saying social things don't work, we need to do just punishment. How would you respond to that? And so that's where I get into our discussion of rehabilitation versus punishment. Across the board, like I said, our more modern system, our focus is more on this, which me personally, I think that's a good thing, but not everyone agrees, and that's okay. What's important to note is that there is a fine line when it comes down to the concept of punishment. And again, these are things that we have touched on in Intro to Criminal Justice, but if you didn't take that class but you're familiar, there is a concept of an individual is free from cruel and unusual punishment. That means that the punishment has to fit the crime, that kind of thing. It can't be, oh, you stole something, well, now we're going to cut off your hand and you're also going to do these 3 things and pay $1 million. No, that's insane. That's not fair at all. That's cruel and unusual. But the concept of punishment in the juvenile justice system is a fine line between too far and not far enough. And those are obviously the two ends of the spectrum always. But do you send a kid to an intensive labor camp and tell them, they're going to work and live on this camp for 6 months and they're going to come back a model citizen? Is that a little too tough? Well, the data supports the concept that those types of programs don't really work. So maybe that's too far. But you can't just let a kid get away with something. If you say, oh, you accidentally stole a Bugatti, well, you know what? Kids make mistakes. No harm done. Just don't do it again. No, that's too lenient. That is not enough punishment. If they go, oh, you stole this painting and sold it for $3,000 and used it to buy pills so that you could take pills and focus. Oh, it's okay. No, there needs to be some kind of response to it. That's how the system works. So even though we treat children differently in the system, that doesn't mean that we don't punish. That doesn't mean that there's not the goal of rehabilitation. So my little comment to you is that punishment versus rehabilitation, it really should be a punishment and rehabilitation. That is really the more appropriate model that works, and that's realistically how rehabilitation works in our current criminal justice system. We like to distinguish that the goal is to release someone in rehabilitation. Punishment is you don't get released. That's not the goal. So important to note, again, throughout this class, we are going to repeat some things that were brought up in Intro to Criminal Justice. So if you took that class, sorry, it's going to be repeat things. Those of you that didn't, you're learning something new. Okay, so with this, and this is as good a segue as ever, let's talk about curfew. And I'm trying to write it with a mouse, and I regret this immediately. Okay. Curfew as a concept is interesting, and there's not really data that supports that it works, and that's kind of the problem. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a curfew, when you are under a certain age, the concept is that if you are out after a certain point of the evening, you are more likely to engage in criminal activity. And so by setting a curfew, that means that those who are going to commit a crime are going to still go out. Those who aren't going to commit a crime will stay home. And so it allows for an easier time to go, they're breaking the law, they're going to break the law. That's someone we have to keep a close watch on. That's in concept. That's how it's supposed to be. But obviously, curfew gets a little hazy because, well, if someone's going to commit a crime, they're going to commit a crime. That's not going to stop anyone. But at the other end, if you tell a kid not to do something, they're going to do it. It's the nature of it. So there are some issues with that. But going back to this concept of the question that was asked in the text that I put forward, the social programs, there is a conversation to be had about this that in particular focuses on the family. And that's kind of what I want to highlight here, is that this, and by family, this can also be home life, because family is not always blood. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's the people you live with. It can vary widely. But a lot of these social programs tend to focus on the family because that's what ends up having the biggest impact and the biggest involvement with individuals. And that's a way to, help those people. So that's kind of when we talk about social movements, or not social movements, social programs for rehabilitation, a lot of the focus tends to be on the home environment of the juvenile in question, because that's how you approach and potentially fix the issue. So the other piece with this is if we go back to our very first concept from the first video in this, we talked about ego identity versus role diffusion. Role diffusion, like I said, is looking up to an adult as a role model. And so if that role model is in the family, that's important. If it's at home, that's going to have an impact. But the other side of this, and where I'm going to segue into something that our text talks about, and that is I hate when it doesn't work right for me. And I think I spelled this wrong, so apologies, but disciplining the parents. This is something that is an issue within the criminal justice system, in particular the juvenile justice system. So the concept of disciplining a parent is not bad, but as you can tell, the way I'm saying this, it's not good either. So, in thinking about in thinking about social programs, if the family and home life is important, if a juvenile, if a youth is continuing to be a repeat offender and continuing to be engaging in delinquent behavior, then maybe there's a problem at home and the parent needs to be disciplined in a way that prevents further engagement. And so, in theory, brilliant idea, great idea. Let's do that. So, it can be as much as civil liability. So, if property is broken, the individual can come to the parent and say, you need to fix it, or the kid needs to fix it, or whatever. In criminal liability, the guardian or adult can be criminally responsible if the minor in question does something. So typically, that is a separate but related piece to this. And then there's also just general involvement. But here's where the issue comes in, and why I want to emphasize why, in theory, great, but not always in practice. Part of the issue with this is that it unfairly hurts low class and minority parents. So, lower class individuals and those who are minority tend to be in a different type of situation than others. So, in particular, imposing a penalty on a parent, either a single parent, a parent of color, or a parent of lower financial status, it can be a problem. So if we were to require a delinquent's parent to pay a fine, that removes money from someone who's already on the lower end of society, one of the poorest individuals. So that's a problem. If a single mother is sent to jail, what does that leave her children with? Do they, not just the delinquent children, but the others, do they go live with a parent and the other parent, or with family, or do they enter the foster system? Like, what happens to them? It like I said, it is a complicated issue, and which is why I wanted to talk about it and emphasize it. Is that disciplining parents is a noble idea and in theory should work fantastically, but we have this issue of, if we go back to our demographic data, our information that, these individuals are typically, juvenile delinquents tend to be under the poverty line, have health problems, have been part of the foster care system. If a parent has to pay for a crime or go to jail and they're a single parent, then that child will most likely enter the foster care system. So there is this issue. Again, I'm not saying that there's an easy answer or not. Almost everything that we talk about in this class, there's not going to be an easy one-to-one answer. There will be some, but a lot of it will be up in the air kind of questions. And so I'm going to urge you to continue thinking about these issues as we go through. So that actually catches us up in the textbook to the end of the chapter. Again, I want to just highlight some things about the textbook that I think are important. When you get to the end of the chapter, there is a summary that goes over the broad strokes of everything that we talked about. There are key terms with page numbers to tell you where to find the definitions. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. When I go to make the tests, I'm going to be pulling from these lists. There are questions for reviews. Some of these questions could appear on a quiz later on. Same with the questions for discussion. They might appear on a midterm or final as a deeper thought question. And yeah, I urge you to use the textbook to its fullest. Like I said, these lecture videos will be covering the big parts of the chapter. Obviously, I'm not going to read you every word for word from the chapter. I just kind of want to hit the highlights. So still read the book, still get that information, and then going forward, we'll have other discussions. So that wraps up this one. If you have questions about this lecture, any of the videos, or about the textbook, or anything of that nature, please reach out to me as soon as possible. If you are struggling to get a hold of the textbook, please let me know. I can see what I can do to get something for you. All right? Yeah, that covers it for this. Make sure to finish. I don't know why I said finish, but do the discussion board. This week we'll have just a discussion board. Next week we'll have a quiz in the discussion board. Anyway, thanks for listening. Like I said, this last one was going to be short. Anyway, I will see you all soon. Bye for now.